$15 matters, right? You buy a paperback and you're getting something very particular before it, and you know what it is, and it sustains the existence of the store.
In January, Emma Snyder took over the Ivy Bookshop, and she joined us in the studio a month into her tenure to discuss her exciting new adventure. We explore the ever-changing retail landscape and how an actual human recommending a book they loved can't replace the algorithm sneakily telling you what you think you like. Emma is super smart and interesting, and I think, if you can believe it, it has something to do with all those books she's read. So you are from Baltimore.
I am, yeah. I grew up here. I was brought home from GBMC to a house in Radnor, Winston, which is at the intersection, just north of the intersection of York and Cold Spring. And then eventually moved to Woodbury for a while, and then to Catonsville and Laurelville.
Oh, nice. Very nice. And you were in D.C. for a stint.
I was, yeah. I bounced around for a number of years. From Baltimore, I was in Connecticut, and then Louisiana, and then China, and then Wisconsin. And then I ended up in
You are literally
DC.
The only common denominator of those
yeah,
places.
right. Somebody said to me, like, what was the through line? And then I ended up in D.C., and I was in D.C. for the 9 years that preceded me being here. So I was everywhere else. I only was for kind of 1 to 4 years.
What were you doing in those places?
A variety of things. I going to school, and then teaching elementary school, and then working for a magazine. So a variety of teaching and writing, essentially.
Okay. So that there's some sort of...
Yes, that is the through line.
Okay.
Teaching and writing would be the through lines, I would say. Books.
Sure.
Shockingly, would be the through line.
Well, then what brought you back here?
The Ivy Bookshop brought me back here. So I was in D.C. for about 9 years. I ended up there for a variety of reasons, largely personal. Thought I would be there for a little while, and ended up finding a job at the Faulkner Foundation, which is a national literary nonprofit that's in D.C. and gives a book prize, is what it's best known for, the Faulkner Award for Fiction, and then gives a couple of other sort of prizes, runs reading events throughout Washington, D.C. To present and promote exceptional writers of American fiction, and ran a large educational program called Writers in Schools, where we matched writers with English teachers in middle and high schools, built curriculum around their books, donated class sets of books, and then brought the writer in at the end for a capstone experience for the student conversations. And they were all very kind of intimate classroom-based size things. So 15 kids would be speaking with George Saunders about his new novel. It was pretty incredible. Exactly. Like, that exists. And also a lot of local writers. And so my first job there was running that program and expanding it. And in part of expanding it, we expanded to Baltimore. And then I became the executive director of the foundation. And in that period of time, met the owners of the Ivy Bookshop, who had become the book supplier for the programming we were running at the time in Baltimore. And at some point I realized I had loved my time in D.C. Working at Faulkner was fascinating. But of all the places I'd lived, which were varied, it wasn't the place that I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And so I gave about 1.5 years notice so that we could start a transitional process. And I thought, I've got 9 months where I get to figure out what I want to do next and where I want to go. And thought it would be very long and open-ended. And about a month or two into that process, I mentioned to Ed Berlin, who owned the Ivy Bookshop, that I would be leaving Faulkner a year later, and that I was open and I would love to find a way to come back to Baltimore if I could. And he said, buy the store for me. And so that is the story of how I ended up here. Yeah, it was a crazy conversation. I thought it was a crazy idea for about 15 minutes. And then I became obsessed with it very quickly. And
it was the right choice?
And it was absolutely the right choice, yes. So I came in about 1.5 years ago as a partner in the store. And spent the last 1.5 years kind of getting to know the community, getting to know the shop, getting to know – I had never worked at a bookstore even. I'd obviously spent a lot of time in bookstores and done things with bookstores in my previous work. Loved bookstores as a kind of community spaces and just as places I like to spend time, but I didn't really know anything about the business of them. And
today is your 1-month anniversary.
Today is my 1-month anniversary, exactly, of becoming the sole owner of the shop. So
how has the first month been?
It's been terrific. It's been – overwhelming in ways. It has been vital. That is the word I think I would use. And mostly because I've just gotten to talk to so many people about the ways in which they care about the Ivy. And I think it's become very clear to me. A lot of people have used the word, and I think it was used. There was an article in The Sun about it, and it referred to it as a beloved local institution. And that is the theme, I think, that I would say, just from getting to talk to lots of excited people about it, is that idea of bookstores as cultural institutions in cities, and as spaces that people really care about.
I actually pulled a quote from that article that I wanted to read to you because I thought it was really curious, or I'm curious to know your plan. You wrote, "I look forward to a very fun, thoroughly communal adventure, figuring out what a bookstore can and should be in this age." So I guess my question is, what do you think a bookstore can and should be?
That is, I think, a question that I'm excited to figure out for the next 20 to 30 years. Yeah, but the first month, I've got some groundwork. I think fundamentally a bookstore is a cultural community space. I think we sell books, and I often say this at the beginning of events there. We sell books. We need to sell books. We want people to buy books. There is a transactional component that is, that is the underpinning of the store, in a way that I think is sort of beautifully simple. I sometimes liken it to the difference in the run-up to the 2016 election, a lot of the conversation around $27 donations versus $2,700 donations. And coming from a traditional kind of nonprofit background of looking for large donors who could make large gifts, the thing I think is brilliant about a bookstore model is $15 matters, right? Mm-hmm. You buy a paperback and you're getting something very particular before it, and you know what it is. And it sustains the existence of the store. But fundamentally, I think what we're there to do and be is a communal cultural space for people to come together and have experiences that are meaningful to them around ideas, around books, which represent the entire universe of sort of ideas that have existed and that have been important enough for people to take the time to put them down into books. And that those acts of contemplation and the sort of ways that it provides a combined sense of access to your own interior world while simultaneously providing kind of a third thing that can connect to humans. I just think books are these extraordinary tools. They're like a really old piece of perfect technology, and we can't improve upon them. We haven't found a way to improve upon them yet. And so I think bookstores are really, in this current moment, independent bookstores are understanding ourselves to be that most fundamentally, something that protects a cultural legacy, something that provides people that space for human connection, and fundamentally, I think something that people trust. And in a world where often lately, I think people feel a little atomized, a little alienated, and like they're not sure of the motives often of institutions or businesses. The motives of like independent bookstores are pretty clear. And I think there's just a lot of social capital there that can be used in really interesting and powerful ways to bring people together and then have people feel more engaged and more excited about, the possibilities of what they can do. So all of that is very generalized. And I think a store like the Ivy currently and what it can be in a community is it has this sense of attachment that's been built over, at this point, more than 17 years, sort of 17 and a half years. And through that, I think, and sort of wonderful operations and extraordinary staff that is just so fantastic and so engaged and knows so much in various ways about our collection, using that to sort of advocate on behalf of books generally and be a book selling partner, but also sometimes a curatorial partner for other organizations in the city, nonprofit organizations, educational organizations. But one of the initiatives that we're starting to work on is also with other sort of small commercial organizations or businesses that want some books within their spaces. That a kitchen shop that wants to sell particular cookbooks that they really believe in, they think are sort of interesting about different movements in food, or we're working with a new tea shop coming in Mount Vernon, and they really care about books.
What tea shop coming in Mount Vernon?
It's going to be called Pillion Tea, and it's opening very soon.
Can you say where? I live in Mount Vernon.
Yeah, it's, oh gosh, I'm going to forget. I think maybe it's on Reed Street.
Great.
I think it's right near the University of Baltimore. It's a wonderful space. I should know the address.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
I missed that. I feel
it isn't open yet, so that may be part, but they've done the work on the outside.
And so they're going to sort of have a pocket bookstore? Is that
yes,
the idea?
Exactly.
Okay.
So they came to us and said, we would love to be able to source books. But what people find when they try and do that is that the purchasing minimums in the book industry and the amount of capital you have to expend in order to keep a significant book stock on site is just something that's beyond the capacity of a lot of small businesses, which makes sense. And one of the things a bookstore is a specialist in doing is investing a great deal of money in a great deal of money in just holding book stock. And so,
which I have a question about, actually.
Yes.
How do you choose the books that come into the store? Because I think that your job probably in every way is so wonderful, especially if you love to read, which I do.
Yeah.
But there's only so much space, right?
Yes.
And there are so many books.
Yeah.
So how do you...
I was actually trying to do a quick estimate recently. Somebody was asking me, like, how many books come out? And while obviously there is a real answer to that, I was just trying to do a quick kind of scan in my head. And my quick estimate that I came up with is probably that we are presented at least with the option of buying 10,000 new different books each season of the year. And obviously we have 2,200 square feet of usable retail space, maybe not even of usable retail space, 2,200 square feet, probably like 1,900. So we currently have at the main Ivy on Falls Road about 27,000 books, which is a lot of books.
Yeah.
But if 40,000 books are coming out each year and you want to carry Dickens, and you want to carry any number of exceptional
of any of the other books that have ever come out.
Exactly come out in human history, you've got to make a lot of choices. And so there's a sort of essentially a two-pronged approach to book ordering and curation. The first is that as new books come out, we are sent what's called front list catalogs. And so each different publishing house sends seasonally books several months in advance saying what's going to be coming out, the next season. And you walk through that and you look at everything. You look at your own purchasing patterns. Though, again, you're doing this in such a scale. There are just so many titles. It's not like you can't spend 20 minutes analyzing each purchase. But you look at and you instinctually know these sorts of books sell in our store, these don't. Sometimes you just instinctually know, like, I think that book has a beautiful cover, or I'm really interested. I personally happen to be very interested in, like, World War I era history, so our store is going to probably carry more than the average store's World War I history books. And so it's a nice combination, I think, of using data and looking at purchasing trends broadly, but also being able to sort of direct them a bit towards things that you think have a lot of value and are really interesting, authors you really believe in. So we do that. I go through, or other members of our staff go through, depending on particularity. We have a wonderful children's specialist named Rona London, and she does a lot of the children's purchasing. We go through, and then after that, representatives from the publishing houses look at what we've purchased, and then we sit down with them and kind of talk through, either on the phone or often in person. It's kind of lovely. We get to have these conversations about, oh, you didn't order this book, but I really think you should order that book. It's going to be a big book. Sometimes it's, we're going to do a huge media blitz and it's going to be on NPR 5 times, so you definitely need to order it. And other times it's, again, other book lovers who are saying, I read this book and it's really special and it's a debut novel and you haven't heard of the person, but you're going to want to have it in your store.
I can't believe you hesitated for 15 minutes to take this job.
I know, right?
It's so great.
I was a fool, but I got over it.
Just 15 minutes.
Just 15 minutes of what could have been the worst decision I ever made in my life.
I think it's so cool to be tapped into this community like that. I mean, that's really neat.
It is. It's an amazing community of people. Yeah. I just got back last week. I was out in New Mexico for the annual Winter Institute for the American Booksellers Association, and I left it. I called my sister, she's a children's writer, so she knows this world, and she's been to Winter Institute before, but I just left, and I was like, it is the nicest conference ever, because it's just a collection of people who have chosen to sort of dedicate their lives to independent bookstores, and then publishers who take it seriously enough, and the reps who want to come, and it's just a really wonderful community of people who really care about books and get extremely excited about very particular kind of niche interests often. So yes, I agree.
Are you still able to, I'm assuming you're a voracious reader. Does this job, I know it's only been a month of you being fully in charge, but have you read more or less given the work that you have to do now? Yeah,
I've probably read about the same amount,
okay.
In part because I had the opportunity to travel, and so I just got to read a lot, and I actually got delayed like 24 hours. So on the one hand, that was bad, and on the other hand, I just sped through 2 books while I was traveling that were terrific. So that is I think about that sometimes. There are definitely periods of time I go through when I don't have time to read enough. And what I actually often do, somewhat sheepishly, I'll admit, is I sort of sample books. So I read a chapter or two from a variety of things because I want to feel like I can speak.
You probably have to do
with
that.
Authority. You have to. I mean, there's no other way. Someone came into the store at some point this summer, and I was trying to help them, and we were looking for a fiction book, I think, for them to take on a trip. And we were walking together, and she said, "Have you read that book?" And I said, "Oh, no, I haven't had the chance." "Have you read that book? Have you read that book?" We got through like 5 books. She just looked at me and she said, "Do you read?" And,
like, ma'am, there are 27,000 books.
Exactly. I was like, I do, but I am, unfortunately, there are limited options. There's limited time for all of the options. But, I worry about that, but I also, it's, in a nice way, I want to very actively make it a priority in my life because I think it's a very important part of the job that I do know that I can speak with authority about things that are coming out, and I can direct people, and just I maintain my own sense of attachment to like why I've loved to read since I was a little kid and what it does for me. I'm just healthier when I read on a consistent basis. So I am working on factoring it into my day and rationalizing that as a part of my job.
Sure.
But one of my strategies is that if I read a couple of chapters of something and then I get distracted by something else, I allow myself to
find a plot synopsis
not
somewhere.
have to go back. Exactly.
What's the best thing you've read recently?
I've read a lot of really great stuff recently. The 2 books I happen to have read within the past week that so I can't help describing them, and they're very different. One is a nonfiction book, and we're going to be doing an event with the author in April. It's called Losing Earth, and it's a book about climate change. And he wrote a large article, or they dedicated an entire issue of the New York Times Magazine to this article last summer, which is the concept of it is that in his mind there was about a 10-year period in 1979 to 1989 when scientists were waking us up to the idea that climate change was real, it was happening, and it had the potential to be absolutely catastrophic for the Earth and for the human race. And it looked like there was a moment when kind of the global community was coming together and decision makers were saying, how do we head this off? How do we make changes that will allow for this to be, while serious into the future, something where we're at least mitigating some of the effects? And then we didn't. And let's look at that piece of history and think about some of the psychology. What was it that limited us, and how do we go from here? And I think that for me, it's a really interesting book. It's wonderfully written. It's very readable. It's highly narrative. There are all these fascinating characters, and some of them, a young Al Gore, in Congress, getting interested in the environmental movement, but some really brilliant research scientists, and it's just heartbreaking. But I think it asks this really essential question, which is, what is about kind of our limitations in being able to conceptualize something on that grand a scale, and what it has done to us and what it is doing to us moment to moment. And I'm becoming obsessive about that as a topic, as a lot of people I know are.
Sounds like a very light vacation book.
Yeah, it's a light vacation book. So then I went and I picked up a novel called The Guest Book by a woman named Sarah Blake, and that'll be coming out in May. And it's this sweeping historical novel. It moves from 1935 to 1959 to the present day and goes through several generations of a family.
Those are my favorite books.
Exactly.
Intergenerational, yeah.
Yeah, multi-generational. Yeah. There's, loss, and one of the characters is a historian, and so there's this undercurrent of kind of how we create the stories we tell ourselves, and the narratives both of grand level history but also of private history. And it's just really satisfying. She'd written a novel that I enjoyed about 10 years ago called The Postmistress, but this was her first novel in 10 years. And so I think it's going to be a book that people will really enjoy reading over the course of the summer.
Good to know.
Yeah.
How do you feature Maryland artists in this store? I know that you have a lot of opportunities for writers to come in and speak, right? Mm-hmm. There's that community element. But how do you choose those books, and who's kind of on the horizon that we should look out for?
Yeah. So we absolutely love that. I mean, we do a significant event series, and it draws both from the local writing community and the local creative community generally, I'd say, and also writers who are on more national tours or reach out to us as they're creating their own tours. But again, we have those relationships with publishing houses. And so that's one of the real opportunities. The more and more we can build that, the more we can kind of advocate on behalf of really people writing really remarkable things and thinking deeply about major topics like the environment or like, our current political culture, bringing them to Baltimore for these no-cost public events, which I think is a really wonderful opportunity. But in terms of the local community, we have wonderful relationships with all sorts of writers in the area and want to carry their books, want to have events on their behalf, want to hand sell their books to people in the local community, both when they're writing about our community and also when they're writing about the world around them, and just to sort of support that community of writers and ideas. And so we do a couple of actually partnership-based things with local organizations. So the Greater Baltimore Cultural Alliance, we host periodic events with them, both where we put different writers and artists in conversation with one another that you might not think there's overlap. And so we had an event last summer where it was an astrophysicist talking to a performance artist about kind of some of their overlap. But we also they run a pair of grant and award programs, and so we do events where we present people once they've been awarded those grants. And then more broadly, we run writing workshops that are often taught by local writers, and then we love to host book launches and ongoing events from people throughout the sort of timeline of the life of the book, and so both for hardback and for paperback. And I'd say one book that I'm incredibly excited about is that Dee Watkins, a local writer, has a book coming out in April called We Speak for Ourselves that's about kind of life in urban African-American communities, and specifically Baltimore, where he grew up and where he lives, and to which he is really dedicated. And it's sort of a bit about who gets to speak and the narratives that are created kind of outside communities, but also the stories that exist within those communities and prioritizing those voices. And I think that that's an incredibly important thing broadly culturally. I think it's an incredible and just as important, if in not personal ways, I think more important in Baltimore. And I also just think he's just like a deeply compassionate human being, and that comes through in his writing. He's also a wonderful writer, and so I'm really excited about that book specifically, I'd say, as well as a host of other books. And I always kind of get nervous when I prioritize one book over any other because there are so many wonderful people working here in the city. But I'm very interested in creating conversations within those communities, and it's one of the things that I sort of look forward to in developing events down the line is one of the things I often talk and think about is wanting to create events more and more that kind of feel like social events that have books and ideas as the anchoring component of them. And so the main Ivy is on Falls Road and has been there for almost 18 years. And then we have a second location at Bird in Hand, which is a collaborative book cafe in Charles Village, and using that space and embedding more kind of food and drink opportunities into that to create experiences where you come and you mingle and you eat and you snack and you have a drink maybe, and you then listen to a really interesting conversation from a writer, but also potentially between writers or between people in the community and writers about books that they love as well. That is something I'm very excited about developing because I'm often struck at reading. Sometimes it actually just happens naturally in Q&A. People will ask a writer, what have you read lately that you're excited about? They get so excited to talk about it. It's a lot easier to talk about other people and things you're excited about often than it is to talk about yourself. The book almost always then sells out because everybody wants to read it because it's been recommended by someone that they respect. And so using that principle to think kind of, who am I interested in learning about? What they're reading, what they're thinking, and what's going on in their brain. And I think it gives it is reflective. Listening to someone talk about the things that they are choosing to read and prioritize thinking about can also just be kind of an access point to who they are.
Sure.
In a way that's really personal. And
especially
lovely.
if you've maybe read something they've read.
Exactly.
And to feel really connected to them in that way. Yeah. Or superior or something.
Yes. Or superior. Absolutely. That's my motive mostly. So.
Yes. Superiority.
And one of the other exciting things that we're doing is we have a partnership as well with the Humanities Institute at Johns Hopkins that is run by a guy named Bill Eggington, who's a humanities professor there. And we developed this and did a few of these last year, and now we're ramping it up, and it's going to be a monthly ongoing series called Humanities in the Village. It happens at Bird in Hand, and the concept of it is to invite professors off campus, again, not to talk about a book that necessarily exists, but rather their ongoing work into sort of a question that they find essential today. And so last year, for instance, we had a wonderful professor at Hopkins named Nathan Connolly come and talk about the Black cultural tradition that led to Black Panther, that a lot of people thought when the movie came out, they saw it, oh my God, this is an incredible story. Sort of maybe they knew about the comic book, where did it come from? Well, there's this sort of grand intellectual tradition that led to the creation of these characters and Wakanda, and hearing him talk through the reading he had done and the work that he has done on that was just fascinating. Sure. And I think of it as sort of like live action bibliography, which maybe doesn't sell everywhere, but sells to the book. Yeah, sells to the bookshop crowd. And so we have an event coming up at the end of February with an anthropologist from Hopkins that's called Impervious Borders, I believe, and it's about the kind of cultural walls within the cultural imagination in America, which obviously is a timely topic. And so, again, looking at it, and what we ask them is that they come up with books that would be sort of accessible to a public reading audience as opposed to just to an academic audience. And then they have a book list, and we curate all the books, and we have them there for people to browse. And so there's this talk, but then there's kind of this engagement with this longer tradition of writing and thinking about those topics. And so that's going to be breaking out. It's been Hopkins professors up till now. But it's going to actually include professors from Morgan and Goucher and a couple of other Loyola, I think, this coming year. And so I really like that idea, again, of just getting people who read a lot and think a lot about interesting topics to kind of tell us what to read.
Do you think it's that idea of community that is so essential to independent bookstores that, I know that Greedy Reads just opened, and Emma Straub, the author, has her spot in Brooklyn. It's called I Love Books.
Books Are Magic.
Books Are Magic.
I have to say, so Emma and I went to graduate school together in Wisconsin for writing, and it was a 6-person program for 2 years, and there were 2 Emmas in it, Emma Straub and Emma Snyder. So it's sort of amazing. They announced that they were opening Books Are Magic the week I signed on the dotted line to become a partner at the Ivy.
Gosh.
And then I moved to Baltimore like the week they opened it in Brooklyn. And I just saw her husband last week there, who runs the shop, and we were kind of telling someone that story. And it's just there's this odd synchronicity to all of it.
You guys are like meant to bring bookstores.
Yeah, no, our old professors are like the Emmas in their bookstores. It's kind of cute.
Yeah, that's
we take a lot of pleasure.
Oh, I'm
in
glad
it.
I brought her up then. I had
so
no
yeah,
idea.
no, it's totally you wouldn't. There's no obvious reason anyone would know that.
Right. But that idea of bookstores as like this kind of like magical community space, is that the thing that sustains them? Because you can buy books online, but
yes,
you don't have someone recommending them or a community built around it.
I think absolutely. And I think that we recognize that more and more. And I think both bookstores recognize more and more what an asset that is. And I think communities more and more, people in communities more and more are seeking that. And I think I will, I suppose, make some sort of excessively broad statements out. But, I think for the last couple of decades, with the rise of digital life, there has been a sense of kind of the world is going to be transformed by the digital world, and it will be able to replicate a lot of things that we have done in local communities and we have done person to person over time. And I think for a while there was a sense of it's going to improve them, optimization as a concept. I think we've lost extraordinary things. I think we feel it on a daily basis, and I think people are seeking opportunities to rebuild that and find ways where it is easy to habituate human contact and meaning in an essential way into their life. And I think the bookstores read that way, but so easily that it is making us an obvious way to do that and to build that. And that is what we hear a lot from people coming into the store. It's an amazing thing for a retail establishment to be able to say, but people just come in and say, we're so happy you're here, like stay, please stay. And I think there's that sense of we represent fighting for something that people are afraid is being eroded from our lives. And I think that dovetails so perfectly with small business in general, that when I ran a literary nonprofit, I write, I read, I taught elementary school for a while, and I like taught kids to read, and that was probably the most meaningful thing I'll ever do. Like, I loved books, and I knew I would love the book component, but I sort of fallen in love with the possibilities of small business as a kind of transformative engine for places and for people to be able to assert their values on a daily basis, and for consumers to be able to assert their values on a daily basis, and for individuals to be able to build things and cultivate spaces that they really believe in. And so, yes, I think that is an incredibly energizing part of what's going on right now within bookstores. And I think another interesting thing happened very much charting that trajectory, which is big box bookstores started to overtake independent bookstores and made life really tough financially. And
we've all seen You've Got Mail.
We've all seen You've Got Mail. So I went back on December. We signed. We had our settlement for the store on December 31st. So on December 30th, I thought that evening, here I am, kind of anxious. I'm not going to sleep. What should I do? So I watched You've Got Mail because people bring it up all the time. I also watched at the end of December.
That's funny.
Did you? Yeah. I was like, I haven't seen it in a long time. I remember it fondly. Sort of fondly, because the story is a little depressing, right? It's not an inspiring tale of
There's also kind of like a borderline Me Too situation going on where like he's like manipulating everything, and which I didn't pick up on when I was like 15 watching it, but at my age now I was like, Tom Hanks, like,
precise. No,
be honest.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of lying and misrepresentation, and then at the end when she's like, I wanted it to be you, I'm like, really? You don't have a conflicted feeling about this?
FOX? I don't think
so. Yeah. Entangling small children in your schemes, but part of the interesting thing about watching it now, 20 years later, is that the story reads very differently. The thing that they were creating in the 90s, that FOX Books was creating, scale and high inventory, sort of expansive inventory, lack of a particular vision, lack of sort of being able to see the story of curation that's happening there, lack of just kind of the human touch, was seen as exciting and as sort of a universe of possibility. And now I think that that's seen as a little cold. And instead, the small children's bookstore hopefully would be thriving now. A lot of them were taken out of business over the course of the last 20 years, but the ones that have hung on are beginning to report improvement over the course of the last couple of years. And last year, this is like an amazing statement for independent bookstores. I think the figure I heard was that 90 new independent bookstores opened in the United States, which is nothing by normal retail standards, but there are like 2,000 in some of us altogether. I mean, I said this to some wonderful guys I met the other day who run a furniture store in Fells Point and they said, I think there are like 2,000, mattress firms in the greater Baltimore area, in Maryland or something. It's a small figure, but looking at it, as maybe 5% growth over the course of the last year is that's amazing. And I think it speaks to communities wanting something and people thinking that this is a viable choice to make. Yeah. And they can sort of see a life coming. And part of the reason I think that's happening is that Amazon destroyed the business model that Barnes & Noble and Borders had created that made it very hard for independent bookstores. And what's emerging is, I think, a universe in which, as I say to people, if you want a book cheapest delivered to your doorstep and you don't want any human interaction, you should buy it on Amazon. We're never going to – that isn't what we do. We have no interest in competing on that in that way. We don't really compete with Amazon. If you want to come to a place where books are valued, where you can talk to other people about them, where you can get recommendations, but also where you can just have like the serendipity of browsing. And if you want to come in and not know what you want and figure it out, then you should come to us because we're going to give you the best opportunity for that.
You're making me want to go book shopping right now.
There you go. Okay. And I think that those decisions are made. So Amazon is, Amazon runs the world, and I find that frightening in a lot of ways, for reasons that go so far beyond the book industry. But I think in a very strange way, Amazon and the clarity of that distinction makes it easier for us to sort of proudly state, this is who we are, this is what we do, and if you value this, come here. And people pretty consistently who do shop there, so it's an absolutely biased group, but say, we perceive that and we value this, and that is why we are here, and
Sure.
we want you to be here. And so that's a
Great.
pretty powerful thing.
Yeah. So I ask each guest 5 questions, each podcast.
Oh, no.
Being really articulate right now. So I'm going to switch out one for you, though. So this is just about your favorite places in Baltimore. It's nice and easy.
Okay.
But the 5th one instead, or the first one, I guess, will be a book question. I read A Little Life.
Oh,
have you read that?
I have.
Dear God.
Dear God, yeah.
I think I say this like not jokingly, but like perhaps serious. I think I have like slight PTSD from reading that book.
Yeah.
It's
so
just
dark and intense.
good Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what the most affecting book you've ever read was.
Oh, so I've actually thought about that question a lot this month because, in an odd moment of, I guess I think of serendipity. On January 2nd, someone I know forwarded me an article from the New Yorker about the book The Moviegoer by Walker Percy. It came out in 1960 or 1961, I want to say. And it was this essay, the title of which was We Still Live in the Mediated, Alienated World of the Moviegoer. I read The Moviegoer when I was 19 or 20. I was in college. I read it because it was someone referred to it in an interview I was reading, and I thought, that sounds like an interesting book. And so I kind of went and got it from the library. And I feel like it's that book that kind of, in many ways, changed my life. And it's this very funny existentialist wander through New Orleans and Chicago around the time of Mardi Gras one year in the late 50s, or maybe it's in 1960. And it's just this man kind of musing on how one kind of creates a meaningful life. And I read it at the time. I've long kind of said it was my favorite book, but I hadn't reread it in a long time. And I'd sort of forgotten at certain points, like, I don't know why it's my favorite book. And I read this essay in the New Yorker, and I was like, this guy, he told me again why it's my favorite book, which is I think that it is a book that is fundamentally about wonder. And it sort of taught me, I think, to think that was okay. And there's this passage at the very end where the main character is watching a man come out of Ash Wednesday services, and he has the ash on. Walker Percy was he was a very devout, active Catholic, and so there are a lot of sort of strains of religiosity or of faith that run through a lot of his books. Anyway, so he's watching this guy come out of church, and he says, and I'm sure I'm going to botch this in some sense, but is he here at the corner of Elysian Fields and Bons Enfants because it's part and parcel of coming up in the world, or is he here because he believes that God himself is present? Or through some dim, dazzling trick of grace, did he come for the one and receive the other as God's own importunate bonus? It is impossible to say. And that's like essentially where the book ends. And I just think that in light of a lot of the things we've talked about in a way I didn't really understand for a long time, sort of I read that book in a moment in time when I was becoming an adult in a world that was sort of heading towards themes of optimization as the future. When you go online, when you look for things in the digital realm, you find the things that you knew you might want to find, or rather algorithms tend to direct you in that fashion. And I think that I find that deeply demoralizing. It's a very limited world that I don't find emotionally fulfilling, and I know a lot of people who feel that way. And the book sort of has helped me, I think, chart a course and sort of keep going. And I think that a lot of people are sort of trying to live outside of that sense that we know what it is we always want, or we know where it is we want to head, and that sort of we want to make allowances for the things that it is impossible to know. And so that is a really lengthy way of answering that question.
Well, I wish I'd asked that one last, because that would be a much better one to end on. Okay, my next question, which is not going to be nearly as interesting, is where is your favorite place in Baltimore to get a drink?
I would say of late, my favorite place in Baltimore to get a drink is the new place that Lane Harlan and her husband had opened, Fadensonnen, the wine bar upstairs. I just entered that space. I think I'd heard about it, so I went like the week it opened, and I just looked around and was like, this is sort of magical. The simplicity of the design, the clear perspective on like what is a delicious wine, natural wines, which I just haven't particularly drunk before. There's just so much care in that place, and so I've gone there a number of times in the last month or two, and I just think it's it's lovely, and I'm delighted that it exists in the world.
I haven't gone upstairs yet, but I've gone into the first floor and then the outside the week they opened. So I think I need to go back.
Yeah.
But it was.
You should go to you should head upstairs. I mean, for a while, the door wasn't even marked, so it was kind of confusing. I also
have 2 small children,
so I
figured keeping them
probably,
outside was a little more fair to the other people.
Definitely more fair. They might not find the aesthetics and the charm quite so exciting as I do, but and on the other hand, I will also say I often go. I live in Charles Village. I live like catty corner. I live on Calvert Street, right around the corner from the Charles Village pub, and I was there last night. And it's just a wonderful thing to live in a neighborhood that just has a mainstay neighborhood bar. Yep. I've been going there since I was 19.
Illegally,
yes. So
all right. Where's your favorite place to eat dinner specifically?
My favorite place to eat dinner. That's a more. I think I have to think about that question a little more.
Should we come back to it?
Yeah, let's come back to that.
Okay. Favorite place to buy a gift that's not the Ivy?
That's not the Ivy. Well, now my family's going to know that I exclusively buy them gifts at the Ivy. And friends, I suppose. My favorite place to buy a gift is probably maybe a tie between where I go when I want to browse gifts are current. Well, I go to Trove often in Hampton. I mean, there's just, again, it's somebody whose taste I trust puts together an incredible array of things. Yes. And then also lately, the pop-up Made in Baltimore store. I love the variety of stuff there, and I just love the idea of buying kind of handmade stuff and made in Baltimore. So,
favorite place to be outside?
My favorite place to be outside is the sculpture garden at the BMA. I think it's just, again, it's that I live 2 blocks from that is kind of amazing to me, and that it's open. You don't have to go in through sort of an access point through the museum means a great deal to me, so that I'll often get a cup of coffee and walk over and just sit on a bench and be surrounded by green space and also art. I just feel it makes me feel incredibly lucky. Yeah, I just think it's a really special space.
It is.
So that would be my favorite.
And then back to dinner.
My favorite place to get dinner in Baltimore is probably the Hellman, which again is sort of
I live 2 blocks from that.
You live 2 blocks from that. That's an amazing place, yes, to live 2 blocks from. And I think I love it for a lot of reasons. Some of it is sort of associative from other moments in my life. The food is obviously spectacular, but I think also that that I know what good Afghani food tastes like is, I think, a kind of wonderful, a delightful thing.
You've added another layer to why I like it. I didn't really think about it like that before.
Yeah, I think otherwise, if it wasn't for the Hellman, I just wouldn't really know what Afghani cuisine was.
Sure. Especially not excellent
Afghani cuisine. Yeah. So
we are very lucky.
That's neat.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you. It was an absolute delight to be here.
Thank you so much to Emma Snyder. You can find everything about the Ivy Bookshop at theivybookshop.com or at the Ivy Bookshop on Facebook or at the Ivy Bookshop on Instagram. There is a theme here. For past Hey Baltimore episodes and all the cool stuff happening downtown, go to our site, godowntownbaltimore.com. Hey Baltimore is produced by Mike Evitz and made possible by Downtown Partnership. Our music is by Super City, and I'm your host, Megan Eisenach. If you want to reach out, email us at heybaltimore@dpob.org. And thanks for listening.